Thank you very much, and rather apt topic, especially as GST is getting ready to roll out by July 1st, as we understand from the government. So the first point that I would like to reiterate is that the telecom industry is 110% behind the government of India in terms of the particular initiative, the GST initiative. We think it is revolutionary in a country such as India. We think it is absolutely necessary. We think it's going to enhance and improve the ease of doing business in India. We think that ultimately it's going to be good for the industry in terms of streamlining the activities and the processes. So those are all things that we absolutely support, and we are absolutely committed as an industry to support and to implement goods and service tax. What we are highlighting today is certain representations that we have made to the government of India. First of all, on the actual rate that is being applied to the industry, and then secondly, to some particular implementation issues that are rather unique to the telecom industry. So first of all, I'd like to highlight clearly the fact of the considerable impact that we have on the industry and especially from the industry perspective on the nation. So when you look at the impact we have, you'll see why we continue to emphasize the necessity for an appropriate rate to be applied to the industry's services. So if you look today, we contribute about 6.5% to the GDP of the country, and it is well known through analytics and through independent research that a 10% increase in the penetration of broadband in the specific context of India affords as much as 2.3% growth to the GDP. So that's rather sizable. And so therefore, the impact of the industry is absolutely important to the overall health of the national industry and the national government as well as the GDP. We employ about 22 lakh folks directly and about 18 lakhs indirectly. The sector has 4.5 lakh crore of debt, which is a matter of great concern, and an extremely low rate of return on investment presently as a result of some of the hyper competition that the industry has been facing over the last several years, and most recently as a result of an entry of a new operator. The sector pays as much as 30 to 40% of all of our levies or all of our revenue as levies. When we compare this to neighboring countries such as China, China pays about 11% by way of telecom companies' levies. When you look at companies like Sri Lanka, it's even lower in the single digits. So these are matters of concern in terms of not only the financial health of the industry, but the large portion of resources taken by the government in terms of levies. The GST council rate that has been applied is 18% for the sector, and we think that this is going to hurt both the consumer as well as ultimately the absolute industry as well. And again, when you look at the comparable percentages, you'll notice that Singapore has a GST rate of about 7%, Malaysia at about 6%, and Australia at about 10%. So clearly, we are over the top in terms of an 18% rate. What is the impact on the consumers, you ask, as a result of the 18%? You'll notice that, first of all, the present service tax on the industry is at 15%. Some of that obviously gets absorbed by the industry, some of it is passed on. But now, given the financial health of the industry and the fact that it has now been increased to 18%, that increase is now going to be passed on to the consumer, because by and large, the industry has lost any capacity to absorb any of this in margin. When you're already operating at 1% PAT margins and negative in some instances, leeway for absorbing it in the voice part of the charges or the data part of charges vis-a-vis tariffs is almost non-existent. There is a demand for better connectivity for voice services, and we're also talking about the data revolution kicking in, where we have to connect 1.1 billion customers or connections from the present 250 to 300 million where we are. So that requires a significant amount of investments, significant amount of affordability. So these are the reasons we continue to harp on the necessity for the government to have the rate of GST at an appropriate level. We're also looking at issues like machine to machine, IoT, things of those technologies that are coming into play, as well as things like cloud computing, significant investments that are going to have to be made by the industry to get this great country of India future ready, and not only future ready, but present ready in terms of comparable economies of the size and scale and scope that we have in India. Telecom tariffs have by and large been below inflationary rates. They continue to go down. And so as we look to go forward, the industry is not in very good financial health at present. And this has been acknowledged by the government itself. It's been acknowledged by the regulator. It's been recognized by the State Bank of India, which is a primary investment oriented bank that lends heavily to the industry. So overall, there is a concern both in the private and public circles about the deteriorating financial health of the sector. What are the challenges being faced by the telecom sector? This is where we look at some of the particularities. We talked about the rate. And before we get into the implementation challenges, I just want to highlight again some comparables within the GST framework. When you look at the GST, there are multiple categories, 4 categories on which rates are set. The first category is the classification of a service or a good as essential, and therefore it attracts rates as low as 5%. Then you go into a next category, which is at 12%, and the third category at 18%, and the final category at 28%. And that's before the application of additional cesses that are applied over and above the GST rate. So we would have ideally preferred to be in that first bucket of essential services. As you know, telecom is classified as an essential service, and things like railways are classified there, and so attract 5%. Even an economy class ticket on airlines is now attracting a 5% rate of GST. So again, we don't understand why the telecom industry has been singled out for 18. When you look at the handset industry, the mobile handset industry draws a GST rate of 12%. So again, we have not even fallen into that second category of 12%. We've been pushed into the third category of 18%. So we feel that given the importance of the sector to the overall national economy and for development, and for the fact that in India we have just one single infrastructure on which everything else rides as far as communications, we felt that that first category of 5% would have been more appropriate. So again, what are the prime issues that we face in terms of implementation? One of the most important ones is the fact that GST is a state-oriented type of GST. There's a central component and there is a state component to GST. Now, when you look at the way the licenses that are given to telecom operators are allocated by the DOT, you'll notice that they are not necessarily done on a pure state basis. They're done on what we call a licensed service area, an LSA. Now, in several instances, an LSA straddles multiple geographies. Let me give you an example of that. When you look at the Delhi NCR region, you will notice that the Delhi NCR region, which is an LSA, has 3 particular geographical entities, 2 states and the national capital of Delhi. We have on one side Gurgaon, which is a significant area, city of the area of Haryana, and on the right you have UP, and again Noida, which is a significant part, certainly in terms of revenue of UP. So you have Haryana on one side, a portion of it, then you have Delhi, NCR, and then you have, of course, on the other side, a section of UP through the Noida. So here you have an example of what we talk about, an LSA straddling multiple geographies. Now, another large example of this is the Northeast. And again, you'll understand that from a licensed service area, LSA, the Northeast is considered one LSA. As a fact, you know that there are many, many states that are included in what is considered the Northeast area. So again, those challenges will have to be looked at in terms of how we solve the LSA versus the geographic articulation of how GST is to be implemented. That's certainly one of the critical areas. The second area is the way spectrum is taxed under the new regime. For the first time last year, the actual allocation of spectrum was categorized as a service, which we thought was unfortunate because nowhere else in the world is the just mere allocation of spectrum which you buy from the government is being classified as quote unquote a service, which now attracts the 15% and going into the new regime at 18%. Now, if you look at the last tranche of spectrum acquisition costs, it was in the vicinity of 35,000 crores of rupees. So going from 15% to 18% is not trivial. Of course, one admits that that does have offsets and input credits that come from others, but still, from a cash flow perspective, this is not a trivial impact on the industry. So clearly the way spectrum is treated, how spectrum is taxed in terms of the GST, these will be important aspects that we are asking for clarification from the government. By the way, the government has been very, very accommodative, that I must say. They set up special groups of commissioners. These are state commissioners who deal with these tax matters, as well as central government IAS officers and revenue officers that are dealing with the specific issues of industry. So we have a specialized group dealing with the telecom industry and with the handset industry. We did meet with them late last night and presented some of these issues. And they were very accommodative and agreed that yes, some of these are critical and some of these need to be worked on, and they are providing clarification and helping us move forward in order to be able to implement by the July 1 deadline. Now, looking at another area, of course, you know that because we have 1.1 million connections all over the country, we have a large distribution and retail sector that services the selling of top-up cards and vouchers. The imposition of these GST on the distribution sector poses two challenges. The first challenge is that many of them are very small, and so therefore for them to try and comply with the requirements of GST filings and the paperwork, so that would be quite onerous for them. So we've asked that the GST be applied on what we call the MRT, the manufacturer's retail price that we suggest. So in a sense, the originating company, which is the operator, pays the service tax, and the distribution chain further downstream is exempt. So that is one thing, and the government has agreed to work with us on ensuring that. They've done something very, very favorable, by the way, which is to make sure that transactions of 10,000 or less are exempt. So that is a key help for the industry. But we want to continue to make sure that the distribution, especially the smaller shopkeepers and retail outlets, are not overly burdened with the implementation of GST. The second issue is what we call a carry-over issue. Of course, you know that there are a lot of top-up vouchers that are in the marketplace already. As a normal practice, the industry leaves about 30 days worth of these vouchers in the remotest parts of the country with retailers. So obviously that has been paid for upfront. So when we give those to the distribution, we pay the service tax. So in the transition, the question arose, would those taxes that were paid as service tax on this inventory, if you will, of vouchers require us to have that as an input credit when we move over to GST? And when we go over to the GST regime, will they be asked to top up the differential from 15 to 18, or in most onerous of situations, pay a fresh 18% on all of that? So you can see that's not, again, a trivial issue. So that, again, has been presented. The government has graciously agreed to look at that and see if they can help. The other area, of course, is the area of infrastructure. The tower companies are third-party providers who provide services to the operator community. There is, again, the problem where the services that were provided by them were perhaps considered not to be offset issues, so any service that was provided by them, but the government appears to have taken a look at that, and there seems to have been some understanding of the issue, and we expect that the government will clarify, if not already affirmed, that any service provided by an infrastructure company to the telecom centers or companies will in fact receive the benefit of a GST offset. So those are by and large some of the major issues of the industry. Here you see what we submitted to the DOT and other ministries in order to address the issues of the sector. We are saying that please continue to recognize that telecom is an essential service, and therefore the rate ought to go to 5%. The issue of the vouchers that I talked about, the distribution change, which I just addressed, the tax on the spectrum, which I mentioned, the reverse charge for unregistered persons. This has to deal with the fact that the smaller retailers are unregistered because there's a threshold, anything above 2 lakhs or more. If your turnover is not up to that mark, then you don't have to register. So again, what happens when you try to claim a credit from an unregistered person, that may have caused some challenges. So we have tried to address that. Self-supply of services. This has to do with, again, what we call related party transactions. In the instance of the example I gave you in the Delhi NCR, if one company, let's take ETTelecom, if ETTelecom from the state of Haryana provides services to the income or the entity that has services also in UP, will those be taxed twice? Obviously, there may be some offsetting credits, but this whole issue of supply of self-services, that is entities providing services to other related entities, and how will that be treated? And again, the government is seized of the matter and has graciously agreed to work with us to clarify that matter. And again, the final point is, again, this inventory issue of vouchers on paid stock. So those are the principal areas that we are working with the government. And again, I just want to highlight that the government has been very, very open, very accommodative, very keen to work with industry. They understand the magnitude of the challenges. They understand the complexity of our industry, the fact that we have 1.1 billion connections, that we are pan-India, that we target just about the lowest parts of the pyramid, social pyramid. So all of these are well understood by the government. The government continues to be keen to work with us, and these are just highlights of some of the issues that we are facing in the industry, so that you are aware of why it is that we say what we do in the media and other circles. So with that, thank you. That is the extent of my presentation. And so if you want to pose questions, I'll be happy to respond.
Moving to question and answer session. The first question is GST for telecom sector. How important it is and not to burden it with tax, with duties. GST for telecom sector.
So as I indicated, right now the service tax is at 15%. The GST that is being proposed is 18%. That is a 3% increase. The government has said that yes, but it could be offset by some additional credits that you have. At the most, per our calculations, it is at 0.7. So even if you were generous to say of the 18%, maybe 1%, can be offset, you still have a real increase of at least a minimum 2%. So that still makes it more expensive for the consumer. So again, we believe that given the impact of the industry on the overall economic development of the country and the masses that depend on the service or even their livelihood, we had suggested that it move back to 5%.
Second question is from Ravinder. Is the timeline for 1st July implementation of GST is on, or would it be extended?
Based on our conversations yesterday with the team of folks from the government is very keen to move forward with the July 1st deadline. Obviously, that has not been notified, that we are given to understand that the government will shortly come out June 16th. There is a meeting of the GST Council to iron out certain issues. And the expectation is that after the June 16th meeting, the government will come out with the notification that July 1st is the implementation. The government has also made very clear that they understand that in the first several months, there will be challenges and hiccups and compliance and teething issues. And so they're keen to work with the various industries to ensure that nobody is overtly penalized or no draconian measures are attracted to any honest mistakes or honest implementation challenges. So July 1st does look at this time as a good date.
Next question. Do telecom companies have the bandwidth for GST?
We think absolutely is a right move. We think it's appropriate move. It definitely goes towards ease of doing business. The present setup where we have bottlenecks every time you cross a state, move equipment across the state, octroys and others, we definitely think this is an overall improvement. But there is going to be some time to implement. Our operator companies and member companies have been preparing for this over the last year and getting their back-end offices and the systems and software. Obviously, remember, we build 1.1 billion connections. So again, not a trivial exercise to get the back office ready, but we are moving very expeditiously to be ready for a July 1st. We expect that there will be some minor challenges and hiccups. And again, so we'll be asking our consumers and our customers to be a little tolerant as we go through this. Government has agreed to work alongside of us to make sure it goes through with a minimum of problems. But like everything else, we do expect a few hiccups, and hopefully this will then ultimately roll out to the benefit of everybody, both consumers and the industry.
Next question is from Rahul. Is GST will also be applicable on spectrum?
Yes, absolutely. As I indicated, this was a bit of a disappointment for the industry in addition to the rate. No other country in the world treats the grant of spectrum as a quote-unquote service. India is one of the few countries in the world, I think maybe the only country in the world that treats the grant of the spectrum as a service, and so therefore attracting the service fee of now 18%. So that we think is both an anomaly and in the long run will be a burden for the industry.
Question from Shankar. Is there any possibility that the applicability of GST will be postponed or as far as telecom is concerned?
Not likely that it will be postponed. It will be one date nationally. So no industry is expected to have a particular carve out. The only issues will be around the various rates. That will be obviously the only differences. But by and large, the implementation date will be a fixed date that will be applicable to everybody. Otherwise, the bookkeeping and the calculation of who's entitled to what offsets would become quite problematic. So it is very, very important that the whole GST regime have a uniform implementation date for everybody.
Next question from Manish. As being projected in GST law, benefit of taxes need to be passed on end user. How are operator going to pass the same to customer as ARPU is all-time low and there is increment in tax charges?
So the question is, what are we talking about when we're talking about passing on benefits? If the rate had gone from 15%, which is the present rate, to say 5% or 12%, then there would have been an aspect of some savings that could have been talked about. But remember that the GST rate is now going from 15% to 18%. So there's really no savings either for the industry or for the consumer. So there's no question now as to passing on any type of savings to the consumer. This 18% being a tax will always be applied on the MRP or on the amount that you are billed as the service. So the consumer will bear the full 18%. Previous instances of taxes, what the industry did was address the tariff of the voice rate to absorb some of that increase. So we would increase the number of minutes, say, that would be included in a certain voucher package. But again, given the very dire financial straits of the industry, we do not believe any of the operators will be in any position to try and do anything more with the tariffs. The tariffs will now be independently set vis-a-vis the competitive environment, and the rate of GST will be applied on whatever that tariff amount is.
Next question from Sridhar. Will telecom companies survive in these debt-paying conditions? Will they be able to pay more taxes?
Clearly, different operators are in different situations financially. Those that are at one end of the spectrum vis-a-vis instances that are already reported in the public media, such as RCOM, for example, that has openly indicated that they are working with their banks because of the significant financial impact that a new entrant has had and other such challenges. So on the other end, you have an Airtel that, in spite of these challenges, still has a positive profit margin, but a very low one at that. So clearly, the industry from a financial perspective is in no position to continue to absorb any further taxes and levies, which today stand at almost 30% of every rupee earned. So again, that is why we continue as an industry association to press for a lower levy, that is, go from, say, the present 15 to perhaps a 12 or a 5. Unfortunately, it's gone in the opposite direction to 18. And so given the financial health of the industry, we are disappointed that it's gone in the wrong direction. And clearly, operators from a financial perspective are not in any position to either reduce tariffs any further. It's already at rock bottom. Things have been given away free. So it's going to be a challenging environment vis-a-vis the 18%, which will ultimately get passed on to the consumer.
Next question from Rakesh. With the introduction of GST, will the retailers working in unorganized market will be covered under tax preview?
So this is what we are looking to make sure is ameliorated. As the government recognizes, there's a large sector of the retail chain that is very small, so the government has set a certain turnover threshold, and that has been changing. I think it was set at 2 lakh, and my understanding is that that may be adjusted upwards, so it may increase. But the benefit of that is that those who are therefore falling under that category, that is with very minimal turnover, don't have to register under GST and don't have to go through the paperwork. And so when you look at our industry, what happens is that when the operator sells a service, it is usually a voucher for talk time or for bandwidth or for data services to the dealer, the operator pays the GST amount in full. And so therefore, when that distributor then turns around and sells it to a retailer and further on down the chain, and no further tax is needed to be collected. That applies only to the smaller ones if you fall under the threshold. That's why we're pushing to ensure that that threshold is at a suitable level so that the lower, smaller SMEs can be exempt from the compliance with GST.
Next question is from Swati. Will we see operators shifting charging of service tax from deduction at the time of recharge to deduction at usage?
So when the GST rate is applied, the 18% is applied at the time of sale, at the time of the transaction. So what happens is that when the dealer sells you that rate card or whatever, the voucher card, he or she will sell it to you at whatever the rate is indicated on the voucher. Now, some companies will collect that up front. Some companies will begin to deduct it on a per usage basis. So it depends on how individual operators will choose to collect and use that GST. Some companies will account for it differently. Some companies will apply it differently. But at the end of the day, the recharge amounts, remember that 40% or so of the average recharge is somewhere in the vicinity of about 10 rupees. So there are obviously multiple recharges in a month. So it's expected that that will be paid almost at the point of sale. But the accounting for it, again, is a bit different. So it is accounted for on the books of the operators on a per usage basis. So it's applied to the consumer at the point of sale, accounted for by the operators on a per usage basis.
Question from Chandan. Will there be any impact or extra burden because of GST on network equipments?
Network equipment is goods as opposed to services. Yes, GST is goods and service tax. So yes, goods that are coming in and for usage of the entities will attract a GST. And again, given what category those goods fall into, can attract rates at the 18% rate. So for example, if the consumer is buying a handset, obviously the handset is at 12%. So obviously we don't bundle it with our services. But in the instance where some operators have chosen to sell you, for example, a handset with service bundled in, that rate could be 12% for the handset and 18% for the service. So yes, some of that goods, depending on what category they fall into, will attract the applicable GST rate, be it 18% or whatever.
Question from Shankar. Is the entry of Jio making the arrival of GST painful to other telecom operators?
The entry of Reliance Jio per se has no particular impact on the GST. What the impact of the entry of Reliance Jio has been to impact revenue and tariffs. So in the short run, obviously that has been beneficial to the consumer. Consumers have faced reduced tariffs for data services. And so obviously what has happened is that the government has really been the short end of the stick on this, because remember, when you reduce the face value of a tariff, say previously if X gigabits of data were sold to you at 500 rupees, and that is today sold to you at 300 rupees. Previously, at 500 rupees, you would have been paying, say, under the new GST regime, 18%. The fact that it has gone down to 300 rupees for that same quantum, now the government gets only 18% of 300 rupees. So clearly, what the GST rate and impact on Geo reducing tariffs really has more of an impact on the government as a result of GST and not so much on the individual operators.
Question from Puneet. Have CEO AI given its presentation yet to DOT or any minister? And if not, then what is our next action plan?
So the COI has been working over the last 3 years with various forums on just GST. The DOT is just one entity. We've been working with the GST Council. We've been working with the states. We've been working with various state commissioners. And this has been going on for the last 3+ years. So we continue to make representations about the nuances of the industry, requirements of the industry, the particular challenges faced by the industry. So that's been going on, and we continue to do so. We continue to make representations to the finance minister, to the finance ministry, to the revenue secretary. We are now working with a particular group that has been set up under the GST Council to deal with specific industry issues. There's that group consists of about 3 IAS officers, 5 commissioners from the states, from various states like Bihar, UP, and of that caliber. And so those groups will address some of the specific issues of the industry. We will continue to make representations to the DOT in terms of the rate. And so those will continue into the next few weeks as well.
Next question is from Manish. What about the tax rates on telecom equipment manufacturers, which are currently under huge pressure from operator to reduce prices in overall value chain and have been asked to absorb the GST impact and pass on benefit, if any, to operators?
So two particular aspects of it. Of course, I've just talked about handsets, which are at a lower 12% rate. Again, they have their own representation and own team. With regard to the network equipment charges on the goods that applies the goods taxes, of course, they will be impacted in terms of the rates applied. However, you have to really look at the particular line item of the equipment. For example, routers might attract a different GST rate than, say, a computer that is used, a laptop that is used, or perhaps a piece of equipment that is used in a switching equipment. So different parts of the infrastructure equipment will attract different rates. Many of them are at the 18%. Some of them are at a lower rate. So again, it depends on the bundle of goods that will be used by the telecom operator. But it looks like, on the face of it, that the maximum rate is now being set at 18%, the same as the service component. I think in the long term, again, once all of this is rationalized and unified, it will be a benefit rather than a detriment.
Taking the last question, Question is from Rakesh. Due to consolidation in the telecom market, jobs are already at stake. Further high GST of 18% will increase more cost and more jobs cuts to compensate the high cost. Please elaborate.
So while job losses are not correlated with the GST, although the GST we expect will increase costs for the consumer, that might impact the demand for the services in terms of the quantum demanded by a consumer. So we'll have to wait to see what that impact turns out to be in terms of the revenue stream of consumers. By and large, we expect that the impact on employment is driven in larger part by the consolidation that is going on in the industry. Please remember that as recently as about a year ago, we had almost 12 operators in most circles. That has come down to 5 circles. Clearly, when that happens and continues to happen, redundancies will be removed from companies that are merging. So yes, we have seen a sizable loss of jobs in the sector over the last year. But that is not to say that those jobs have not been picked up in other areas. So there is a lot of retraining going on. We as COI also a part of the sector skills training establishment. So we are skilling and training people who are looking to re-enter or reskill themselves. The government has programs where the government has subsidies for those who find themselves displaced to retrain themselves and pick up skill sets in other areas. Please remember that we see a lot of future for knowledge-based consumers and knowledge-based employees. So I think the shift is in the skill sets that are required for employment in the technology industry and in telecom. So while we do have losses at present, we think in the longer term, those will be repurposed, reskilled, retrained, and in the long term, we will see expectedly a uptick in the demand for employees.